So that was kind of just my presentation stuff. Now I just want to point out some of the things we're going to talk about. And one of them is, of course, the science and how use science in everyday life, and also how sociality and human interaction works and how important it is for human. And just a little story is that for me, it totally made sense when I got a phone call from a guy called Andreas, and he's telling me, should we meet at the Café Stiften here in town? He wants me to do a dinner for 9. And I said, yeah, sound great, and for the space station. So we met, and on the whole thing is, I didn't know we had an astronaut at this time. So I met him totally without knowing anything about it. And we were sitting down, he said, dinner for 9, 6 months from now. I said, that's no problem. And the whole thing was, everything is freeze-dried. Everything was packed in a way which was very unhuman-like, very not pleasant to eat. And he wanted to, and he's like the astronaut, last astronaut to arrive, and he's only going to be there 12 days. So he wants to make a Danish dinner at the space station with organic products, just to invite them around a meal and, you know, have this conversation, have to bond with these astronauts, because they have been working very close in very close space. And he asked me, of course, to do this, and he was so passionate about food that my chef brain just said yes without my kind of real brain saying, this might be dangerous, or can this be done? So I said yes, and everything, you know, went out to the press, and then I was receiving the papers, the mails from the space station, and it was telling me what can be done and what cannot be done. And that's a perfect rule book for me to, like, which rule can I break and which rule can I almost break. Long story short, you know, working, developing menus, translating to Russian, kind of getting into Russian custom into a space station, that's a totally another story. But it kind of, we managed. But halfway through, or just before we had to send it away, I was interviewing some of the astronauts, and they were sending me videos and what, you know, how do they eat now, and updating me on stuff. And I was sitting in front of my computer and looking at it. And, you know, menu was done, things were, you know, almost finishing off. One of them goes like, oh, remember when we go to space, we cannot smell. And he left, like, and you know, it's like, wait a minute. I know smell is kind of important in the taste experience. And Andreas said it should be a tasty meal. So I need to know more. And he was like totally cool, like, no, it's very normal. You know, if you go to space, it's called liquid fluid shift. You know, gravity on Earth works the way the blood goes down, the heart pumps up, and this motion goes back and forth. If you go to space, the body, it takes 5 days, he says, but it has to adjust that the pumping action doesn't have to be that strong. So in the beginning, and actually when you look at new astronauts arriving, the head grows, actually, literally, like an overpressure, and it clogs up the smelling capability. So here I was saying, you know, chef, I'm doing it, tasty organic food in space, and realizing they cannot smell. And that also explained one of the reasons, because I was looking what they eat. Raw garlic, Tabasco sauce, horseradish, direct, because they were inhibited. They kind of felt the sensation of it, and that made them, oh, it's tasty. So I had to figure out another way to make food tasty or feel tasty without the smell. And that's why Ole's book came very handy on umami, because the mouthfeel or the richness of it actually wasn't, you know, works without the smell. If I just pump a lot of, I base the menu on umami, that will give them a sensation of richness. If I then now can season it hot or put horseradish to it, in this way we can enhance the taste. So what we did is we made the food, and I just have to get this. I want to do something with you. Brought some of the stuff we made for them. Is how to bring the human factor into space, to enhance the experience, to make it remindable. I want you to because there's some challenges on this with the menu. If you try to close your eyes and imagine you would cook up the most delicious meal for 10 people. And you know, okay, some of you play with you can cook. You're cooking the most delicious meal and putting it in front of for 10 people. Entrance, a main, and a dessert. And then you imagine it, all this food for 10 people, putting it in front of a table and spreading it out on a table because you want it packed for like a picnic. And imagine this basket, you're putting everything in the basket. You have all these ingredients, you have the perfect food. And if you have that, open your eyes for those who participate. That's again one challenge I had, because I wanted to make this very human element of sharing a meal in space. They told me this is the box, the size where you meal for 10 people. 3 courses can be in. So I had to rethink the whole thing again and make some packing design for that. One thing that the dessert, I really want, okay, how can we bond? Now they're tasting some food, how can we bond? How can I enhance this human thing? I met one of the guys who was a space engineer. Very cool card. I kept it. Space engineering, Roland. And he talked about, oh, I'm going to help you inside. You know, if it's something you need from NASA or whatever, I'm the guy. I get it for you. And this guy here, my colleague, you're probably not going to work with him because he's almost finishing up designing the espresso machine for the space station. And I was like, if he does the espresso machine, I'm going to do the sweets for the coffee. And we did. And we found out, together with a good friend of mine, Palle, which works at chocolate, we figured out, let's do a space rock as a chocolate. This one. And, oh, very good timing. Space rock in chocolate. And we were first like, okay, should we do different tastes? Like, because there was an Afghan, there was an American, a Swede, a Dane. Should we do individual tastes so they go like, oh, childhood, and play with all the fancy, you know, fine dining stuff? But that we just realized, but how can they interact with that? Of course, they could talk about, oh, it tastes like something from back of my childhood. But how could we actually get them to feel this moment, to talk together, and have that moment for the rest of their life? It's kind of putting high there, but that is what we wrote. So we figured out, what about if we make this one hollow, and we send a 5x5 piece of paper to the wives. And we make them write a handwritten note, send it back to us, fold it, put it in there, and then be very, very sure that the astronaut gets the right message. And there we were and we would not tell anyone. 4 people knew. So you could say that we managed to smuggle something into Russia and to the space station, but only 4 people knowing. What happened was, and I told to Andreas, I said, he knew, of course. I said, this is Danish chocolate. The whole thing, you know, you can talk about the ingredients. Here's your info package if you want to set the scene. But please manage how they eat this, because there's a letter in there with the message. I don't want to be known as the chef that you know, choked up an astronaut. And so we configured a way of eating it, and I wrote it down. And typical space industry-like, mail came back. we're not sure about the process, you have to put it very strict. 1, you open the box. How? Fuck. Okay, you remove the ceiling. 2, like this, right? It's very like a pilot thing. I think they had it like this and just went for check 1, check 2. It's like eating, it's eating a chocolate. But they had, and this is funny, when I did all this, they had a practice on Earth with other astronauts training how to eat the chocolate. But they did it right. They bite half of it, and the note stuck out. And some of them asked Andreas afterwards, how was the moment? He was sending me pictures of them floating around, and we packed that in a transparent, see-through little plastic thing, so it looked like a planet. So there were 9 people floating around with a little planet on the side, which they were on. And when they opened it, some of them were more like, oh, fortune cookie, how funny. But the moment they opened the message and they received a handwritten notice from their wife, which is very rare nowadays for us men, without saying dishwash, children, they had this moment. They had a meal, they had a special connection, and this moment actually made, I'm still working with them on going to Moon and going to Mars. How should a meal look like when we go to Mars? How important is a meal, coming together? Because there's like an artificial way, which is having a basket, having some glasses with virtual reality, some smelling, and the biscuits, you're going to show you strawberry and the smell of strawberry, and you can eat the basket, and you go like, oh, strawberry bread. And there's a natural way of growing stuff in space farming. And there's I was in London last year on a workshop, and an astronaut called Don Petit, he actually showed me pictures where he smuggled up seeds, totally my guy, smuggled up seeds to space and grew zucchini. Or how zucchini should look. It's very, and when he told that, and actually he didn't tell anyone, there's cameras on the space station, he put they're floating around places where they couldn't look. And if they had a sweep with the camera, he would move it. But that just showed it like, oh, it's possible. It's possible to grow stuff. It's kind of different, and we're not there. But this is the way. We have to engage cooking in space. We have to engage eating together in space. We have to figure out in a natural way, not 3D print. We can 3D print a fully functioning kidney if we want. We're at that stage. And they're trying to 3D print food, like serious, not just candy. So hold this discussion about if we put people a human in a rocket, send them 3 years to Mars, should a human step out of it? And my accuracy is you need to engage in food and surroundings to be sure.